Welcome back. So, news of the day, and I've been on Twitter, so we're going to talk about that at the end. Now, talking about NHL and hockey and all that wonderful stuff at a time where, yeah, 2020 is never going to end. It's never going to end, is it? Anton Stralman has come out and revealed that he has dealt with bronchiectasis or bronchiectasis. Not sure on the pronunciation, but it's a lung disease, and it is one of those underlying conditions that, though he's 33 years of age and he's young, it could lead to a greater risk of him getting very, very ill if he were to contract COVID. So he has said, is it worth it? That kind of thing. And there will be a lot of players that have that opinion. That's part of the reason why I'm not doing a bunch of previews. I could sit here right now and I could line up all these rosters and go, okay, so here's how this roster competes with this roster. But we don't know what players are going to play and which ones are going to say, you know what, I'm sitting this one out. I can't do it. And there may be players who have underlying conditions we don't know about who are going to come out over the next couple of months and say, I can't return to play because, and have that out there. And then it's, they were supposed to be opening practice facilities this week. That was the plan, was to get into phase 2 this week. How many cities are going to be doing that? And when I'm watching things that are going on with the news, one thing that I've been thinking is, and this was the case with Vancouver back in 2011. It wasn't a huge area of the city that was affected, but it was very, very visible what happened and all of this. And so one thing I try to keep in mind is that, how much of each city is involved in this. And how many of these cities are we going to see where maybe practice facilities won't open up, not because of health concerns, but because of what else is going on right now on the south side of the border? So we'll see where that goes. Frankie Corrado signs a deal with Moto, and I'm going straight into that because there isn't a segue from one into the other. Corrado, of course, Vancouver fans liked him a lot, and then he went to Toronto. He ended up sitting out a lot of games for Toronto, and they didn't want to waive him, and then they finally did. And I would like to see him excel with Moto. I'd like to see him excel with Moto and then get another shot with the NHL. But either way, at the very least, he'll be playing pro hockey in Europe, and I honestly wish him the best. I liked Frankie Corrado a lot. It just didn't quite work, and we'll see whether or not he gets his return to the NHL in a triumphant fashion years down the road. And if not, Moto's a perfectly fine place to play. So, and again, there isn't really a way to segue these. It's tough. But young player coming up for the New York Rangers, Keandre Miller, is talking now about what happened in that Zoom call. And at the time, he didn't feel all that comfortable because of all the world coming to an end stuff going on at the time. And I think it's a matter of, you don't want to call attention to yourself. You don't want to seem petty. You don't want to sound like you're whining. And so he didn't say a whole lot. But he does say that coming up in hockey, that it's been tough for him. And that he has encountered a lot of negativity. Well, some negativity along the way. I'm not going to speak for him and say it's been a ton all the way through. But he's made it clear that he has had his roadblocks along the way. And that hockey does have a ways to go. And for the New York Rangers themselves, this is an odd time because, Keandre Miller's their prospect, and yet MSG and the policy of the Rangers in general has been, let's not talk about what's going on in our city. Don't post anything on Twitter. Don't get involved. Just stay out of it, while every NHL team is saying something except for them. And I think Ottawa's the other one that hasn't officially had a statement. And yet when everybody does it and every team, then it sort of feels like it's an obligation. Sort of like, are there teams out there that are saying, okay, all right, we're going to put out this social media post where we sound like we're really, really, doing something important. And are they doing that just for the look of it, just for the PR? That's something that occurs to me. So, and speaking of which, the Watch Your Tone podcast from Tony D'Angelo apparently has nothing to do with the Rangers. The Rangers we don't have anything to do with that. And Brendan Lemieux deleted the tweet he put up about pushing boundaries. So, Brendan, if you watch my channel and you decided upon watching my channel, Shannon makes a point. Cool. If that's not the case, that's fine as well. And apparently Lemieux won't be on the first episode. And I hear that, and all I think is, So was he actually on the first episode? And as soon as that came out, and they read the room, they went, maybe not. And maybe D'Angelo's going back and doing a different first episode. Who knows? We'll see. It should be a delight, right? We'll see how that goes. But we need a feel good story, right? So a feel good story right now, other than Corrado getting on with Moto and having a chance to continue his career in Europe. Cody Curran, a name that came out of nowhere. 30 years of age, signs an entry level contract, and I'm like, that's not right. So I see this on Cap Friendly, I'm like, that can't be right. So I go over to Elite Prospects, and I'm like, oh, okay, so he played for University of Calgary for a long time. Goes over to Sweden and proved himself. Absolutely proved himself. For Rogel last year, 48 points in 49 games. He's a defenseman. And Anaheim gets him on a 2-year, $1 million a year deal. So congratulations to Cody Curran. Good for him. I think that's a solid move. There's no risk in it for Anaheim. And they get somebody who maybe he'll be a ringer. Maybe next year at this time we're talking about him as an absolute steal. And maybe it'll cause GMs to start circling back on some older players who maybe fell through the cracks along the way. There are plenty of cases of undrafted players who become star players later on. So hopefully that's a feel-good story. We need feel-good stories right now. We really do. Connor Corcoran signs a 3-year entry-level contract with Vegas. 154th overall pick in 2018. He's a defenseman. 54 points in 62 games for Windsor. So that's not bad. Those are pretty good points for defensemen. And so we'll see whether or not Vegas's draft picks from the later rounds and mid-rounds end up becoming solid NHL players. That can be the definer between your teams that draft well and teams that draft really, really well are the ones that find those late steals. So at 154th, if he ends up becoming a regular defenseman at some point in his career, that's a solid win for the Vegas Golden Knights. And they do need that because as still a relatively new team, that's something that we'll see whether or not that eventually affects them. That maybe when they start to drop in the standings at some point, that has to happen, right? Like Fleury can't play forever, but then they went out and got Leonard. So if they keep Leonard, they're going to be good for a long time, aren't they? But anyways, one thing I've wondered with them is because of the fact that they came into the league and they wanted to be good right out of the gate, and good on them, whether or not that might cost them in terms of prospects and their prospect depth. So again, if a guy like Corcoran can come out and prove to be an NHL player, that makes a big difference. Then it doesn't look as bad to lose Brandstrom or Suzuki, and then you're like, all right, well, we're pretty good at drafting in general, so we can afford to give up those highly touted prospects because we know some of the other guys that you're not talking about are still going to be pretty good. Fredrik Karlstrom signs a 2-year entry-level contract with Dallas. He was a number 90 overall pick in 2016. He's a center. He had 19 points in 51 games for, how do you pronounce this? Veikkaus. How? How does V-A-X-J-O become Veikkaus? How do 2 umlauts turn that into Veikkaus? I really, really curious. Because the only letter that I hear is the V, and everything else after that I'm like, nah. Because Veikkaus to me is V-E-K-O-I. But, again, and apparently that's one of 2 different pronunciations. From one part of Sweden it's Veikkaus, and from the other part of Sweden it's different. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to do the one. I'm not going to do both. Because they sounded pretty different. And, Sweden, you got to figure this out. Yeah, it's just weird. So yeah, I'm glad that I got that right because yeah, to me that looks like Vaxho or Vaxjo. Vaxho would be how I would guess it was pronounced if I wasn't told it's Veikkaus. Which thankfully there's a YouTube video that's 19 seconds long that tells you, it's Veikkaus. So, there you go. Karlstrom will come over and we'll see whether or not he makes Dallas. Now, player leaving the NHL along the same line as a Frankie Corrado is Lucas Radil. Radil is signing with Spartak Moscow of the KHL. I don't think that's official yet, but that's the plan. Is he's apparently going over to the KHL. He didn't have any points for San Jose this year. He had a down year. Last year he was decent, But it definitely wasn't working out for him in San Jose, and odds are he'll make more money in the KHL than he was going to make in the NHL anyways. So, it's one of those things where you can understand the team parting with the player, and you can understand the player parting ways with the team, and we'll see whether or not after a year or two in the KHL whether or not he comes back, because that happens too. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. Now, in the realm of polls that I'm not sure why it exists, apparently they polled Canadians on whether or not they care that games could or may not be played in Canada for the playoffs. They understand there's no fans in attendance, so it really doesn't matter where they play them. Our prime concern is safety, so as long as it can be done as safely as possible, that's fine. So if you got to have it on the moon, you have it on the moon. That's it's fine. It's great. And as long as it's, outside of sunlight, it'd be great on the moon, because like negative a lot. So, I mean, the lack of oxygen and air could be a problem. I understand, but these are tough times. Now, 24% of those polled said it's very important to have games in Canada. 20% said somewhat important. 35% said not important at all. 12% said somewhat important, and 9% said they don't really have any opinion. They don't know. So that's 44% here, 47% here, and 9% here. What do you think Canadian media is reporting? They're reporting Canadians don't care if games are being played in Canada. It's 47% on this side, 44% on this side. And it doesn't say in there how many of them are actually hockey fans. So, honestly, as a Canadian myself, I'm used to there not being any playoff hockey for Canadian teams past about round one anyways. Sometimes there's no hockey games being played in Canada in the playoffs at all. Every now and then all 7 teams miss the playoffs. So, it's really not a big deal to me as long as it gets played, and it's a matter of playing it safely. Which brings me back to Tuesday. Today is Tuesday, and it's Blackout Tuesday, and there's a lot of posts all over social media. Basically, it looks like it started with the music industry, and now it's just all celebrities everywhere, and now you got all these sports teams and all these athletes, and everybody's speaking out. When everybody talks at once, though, it becomes, to me, it kind of becomes noise. And so, for me, I've always viewed it as trying to be part of the solution. I'm old enough to remember the Rodney King riots back in the late 80s. It was 89, wasn't it, with Rodney King? And I remember that, and I remember how disturbing a lot of that was, and both the incident that started all of it, and then the rioting after, and this is that amped up to 20. And does social media help? Probably not. How I've always viewed it is trying to be part of the solution. So sort of like with what we're going through right now with all the the COVID and all that. Just make sure that I'm keeping myself safe as possible, and look out for my neighbors, and just make sure that and that's the kind of the way I view it, is that if we're doing our part in our community, that's important. There are definitely systemic problems everywhere. This is not a US thing. This is something we see it in Canada too. And it's different. Every area it's going to be different. From city to city it's going to be different. One of the things I've really enjoyed with going to the US and traveling in general. I remember going to Edmonton, and just differences between Edmonton and Vancouver are fascinating. And then we go down to Seattle, and you hang out in Seattle, and then we went to Vegas, and the differences are huge, of course, between Vegas and Seattle, right? And there are tremendous differences from city to city, and I think it's good that everybody's talking right now, but I think the problem is that the way that we tend to do things, and again, this is me being old and remembering Live Aid. I've talked about Live Aid before. We all got upset about starving children in Africa, in Ethiopia, and we all said, hey, something's got to be done. So they had Live Aid, and then that was it. And even though they've had comedy relief and all of this, they've had plenty of the different charity events, but it sort of feels like you have that event and then you go, there we go, we're done. For things to change, it can't just be a one-day thing. For things to change, it has to be a change in the way people think. And for myself, I never cared about any of that stuff. When I was in school, I had I hung around mostly in my senior year with people who were natives because they didn't care what music I listened to. They didn't care what clothing I wore or what my hair looked like. They didn't care what was in or what was hip. They just went, "Are you a prick? No? Well, you can come hang out with us." That was it. As long as I wasn't a prick, I could hang out with them. And it was fine. And then conversely, there were always people that seemed to be kind of scared, of them because they're different, right? And so I was kind of like, oh, this is strange to see it from the other side, where you'd see people, moving away, and I'd be like, this is strange. Systemic change is not going to happen on social media. So, and it's not going to happen here in a YouTube video, because I may have a lot of subscribers and I may have a very public face for those who follow hockey. I'm not the guy. Now, I will do what I can in my community. I know when we were, it was tax day yesterday, and we were stressed out trying to get all the taxes figured out and make sure that everything is correct, and all the I's are dotted, J's are dotted, T's are crossed. And, looking at charitable donations and going, wow, and again, it's something I don't talk about it on the channel, but saying, okay, well, we max that out. So it's one of those things where sometimes I think it's great to give the lip service and all of this, and I've seen all the quotes from all the hockey players, and I've seen people commenting on the channel like, oh, you need to say something, you need to say something, when people who know me would know that, yeah, I would not at all agree with what happened to George Floyd at all. That's just right. But again, when you're on the internet, I can stand in front of this computer and I can say whatever I want. I can look at this webcam and say whatever I want. The truth of who I am, and the truth of how I am, and the person that I am, comes out when I do meetups. It comes out when we travel and we meet with subscribers. It comes out just in my daily, conversing with people and live streams and things of that nature. And I feel like all of that put together comprehensively makes a difference. There are teams right now that are tweeting out, whether it's the black photo, just the black box, that fixes everything, or whether it's it and they retweet these other grand ideas from Martin Luther King and whatever. But then you hear all these horrible stories about things that have happened, and they go quiet on the reality of what those organizations may have done or may be doing, or what people in their employ might do, and how people are necessarily treated. And that's the thing, So I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of that posting. I think if you're on social media, you see that already. So if you're following YouTube _ the Hockey Guy on Instagram, and you're like, well, where's Shannon's post on all this? What does Shannon think? People who know me know what I think. Very, very aware. I know when we go out to meetups and we go out to dinner after, and I'm very, very frank. I am very frank, very to the point, and sometimes kind of coarse about some of the stuff that goes on in the hockey world and just in general that you hear in the news. And it catches people off guard. But again, it's easy on camera to say all the right things and to make everything sound like it's going to be wonderful, or everything's going to... And again, I'm seeing a lot of that today. And I really hope that we see some actual action from people. And again, nothing is really that simple. I've been having that debate on my Facebook account. And again, we'll see how far this goes. To anybody watching this in the States, I hope you're safe. I hope everything's, going as well as possible. But when you have 40 million people, and that's an underestimation of how many people are out of work. That's a lot of people out of work. That's a lot of people who may not have money right now, who may be having a food shortage in their home. That's a lot of stress. That's a lot of pressure amped up on people. So, I hope that you're doing well with where you were at. And again, just be part of the solution is the only advice that I have today. Be part of the solution. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. It means a lot. And do hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. I'll talk to you again soon.